Davison homes in on some heavenly bodies.
Planet Earth, our home in space. Human beings have always been able to see 5 other planets in the sky just with the naked eye, even though they're hundreds of millions of miles away. But we couldn't learn anything much about them until the discovery of the telescope.
Right, now you've all seen the moon, okay? Now,
At this public observatory in Dundee, a group of visitors are getting their first look through a large telescope. Seeing a planet close up for the first time is always a special moment.
Just ready? Here we go. Somewhere across this way. We must be nearly there. Yes, I think we've just about got that. Now I clamp it into position, and hopefully, in here, you'll have something to look at. So, who's going to look first? And then just lean back a bit. That's it. Now we're just about there. Okay, to your left just a little bit. Put your eye up to it. You may need to move around to get in line with it.
Saturn.
Right. Right. Go on, how did you know it was Saturn?
Because of the rings.
Yes, you can see them. 900 million miles away and you can see them. It's the only planet that looks like that, instantly recognisable, isn't it?
It's jumping around a bit.
It's the atmosphere, the air is always moving it around. It doesn't look absolutely pin sharp, it's a little bit fuzzy, it's just the atmosphere, it's always this problem, but there you are. Now you can see how the rings go around the back of the planet, you can see the shadow of the rings there, it looks wonderfully three-dimensional. And of course those rings are not solid, it looks as if it's just cut out of paper, but they're really millions of little fragments of ice, every one of them independently orbiting around the planet. That planet is actually nearly 9 times the diameter of the Earth, so it is pretty big, but at that distance, we need all the power of our telescope to show it to you. And you know, when Galileo, who was the first man to point we think he was the first man to point a telescope at the sky and look at it, his early telescopes were so crude. He could tell there was something funny about Saturn, but he couldn't work out what it was. It seemed to have sticky, outy bits. He thought perhaps it had 2 moons very close to it, but he couldn't work it out at all. They had to wait for a better generation of telescopes to find out what was really there. Imagine nobody dreamt of planets having rings around them. And when you look at Saturn on the sky, some of you have seen it out there, it just looks like a star. You would never know it looked like that. Actually, most of the big planets do have rings of some sort, but they're mostly very faint and dark and dusty rings. Why Saturn's rings are so bright and icy is just one of the many things that is not yet completely clear to us. Saturn has many proper moons, and many of them seem to be largely made of ice. It's possible that if a moon strayed too close to Saturn, the tidal forces would actually break it up and it would simply disintegrate. So perhaps we're seeing there the remains of a moon that broke up. Perhaps it's only a temporary thing. Perhaps in a few million years those rings won't be there, in which case how lucky we are to be looking at them at just the right time.
Our planet is part of a solar system, a little group of planets orbiting a central sun. Compared to the stars, the other planets are very close to us. It's our own backyard, really. So it's no wonder that the planets have always held a special fascination for us. Orrery is a small town in Ireland near Cork, and in 1713 the eccentric Earl commissioned what, for those days, was a fabulous model. It was a great way of showing the Earth and the planets revolving around the sun. The model maker christened it an orrery.
The gear ratios come to...
There's less demand for orreries in these days of computer animations, but in Yorkshire I tracked down the workshop of John Gleave. John, there are, I imagine, very few orrery makers left in the world. Are you one of a dying breed?
It seems to be so. I seem to be the only one, at least in the UK, who's still making them.
What first got you into that way of making this?
I wanted to make one for myself, basically. The idea of the solar system seemed very unusual. Everything seemed eccentric. Nothing was aligned. Everything was tilted. And the motion seemed so very strange. And the idea of a model was the way of getting your head around the idea. Basically, it's clock-making skills, using clock-making materials, using brass, essentially, because it's a beautiful material to work.
Tell us a bit about the background to this, John.
Well, this is a replica of a model that was made in the 18th century, mid-18th century. There were several of these models made on this kind of scale. It shows the 6 planets and the moons that were then known at the time.
The thing to remember about this is that obviously the planets and the sun are not to scale, but their relative movements are precise.
Exactly, yes. The planets and the moons are orbiting in their correct periods.
So starting from the middle, the sun, take us through them, will you?
Right. The sun is a ping-pong ball, but it's useful in that it has an equator, which points out the point the sun is inclined as it turns. And this was known very early on. The first orrery, in fact, did in fact show the sun rotating and inclined at its angle. At the centre of the sun, then the closest planet, which is Mercury, and then the next planet out, which is Venus. Then we go out to the Earth and the Moon, and then finally to Mars. This is Jupiter, the first of the giant planets out from the Sun, with the 4 moons that were known at the time, the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, further out. The next giant planet, of course, is Saturn with the rings, and these are the 5 moons which were known at the time.
And where exactly will this orrery end up, John?
This is going to Derby City Museum, where they have a painting which depicts an orrery of exactly this kind of design and showing these kind of movements.
And how long would it take you to build something like this?
Ages.
Not 900 million miles away, in Stoke-on-Trent, in fact, Paul Doherty, helped by his son, is getting ready for an evening's observing. Paul worked for years in industry, local government and insurance, but in 1982 he decided to give up his day job and spend time doing the thing he loves, studying the sky, especially the planets. Some people use their telescopes to take photographs of space. Paul's approach is altogether more artistic. It's an extraordinary looking telescope, Paul. How did you come by this thing?
Well, it's built completely out of scrap. The fabric of the telescope cost me about £50.
And you built it?
Yeah, you want to look?
Yeah.
Okay. Just step down out of the way.
Yeah, I think I need a bit of help here. Yeah. It's hard to find, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's using quite a high magnification. It's a slight movement of the telescope and you lose it.
Keep sort of searching the sky there. Oh, hang on. I see it! I see it! I've lost it. No, there it is.
Great.
So we're looking at it from the underside of the rings, sort of angled down. It's a great shot. It's like science fiction.
It almost looks artificial, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. So, Paul, what exactly do you call what you're doing now?
Well, it's a form of astronomical recording. Some people take photographs of what they see through the telescope, and I prefer to actually record what I see by making drawings.
So what you're doing here, Paul, is just an initial sort of outline of the planet, is it? And then you'll do the detail when you get inside?
No, it'll all be done at the telescope. All the detail will have to be on this sketch before I go in, and it's important that you actually do the drawing at the telescope to make sure that it's accurate. You can't remember. Once you walk away from the telescope, you begin to forget, and any drawing that you try to do afterwards would obviously be inaccurate. If we do actually take the odd spots now and then, it may not seem to be important, but anyone else who makes observations over the next few weeks, including myself, will be able to work out a rotation period for that area of the planet. Because these are cloud belts and they all rotate at different speeds. So it's the charting of those spots and the continual observation of them and timing across the centre of the planet, which tells us the speeds of the wind currents in Saturn's atmosphere.
So let's move inside, shall we?
Yeah, okay.
I think that could be pretty hardy to be an astronomer.
Yes, that's true.
Obviously everything here is black and white, so then you obviously put in the colour when you make the...
Yeah, well, the observation that's made at the telescope essentially needs to be black and white. You can't do colour work in the dim light out there. So what I would do is, whilst I'm at the telescope, which you saw, is make extensive notes about the colour of the planet and about all the details that don't go into this initial black and white drawing. And then I would use all that information, basically the black and white drawing and the notes, to produce a colour observation. What I do here is put a wash, a watercolour wash on the base board, and then with crayons colour any of the particularly colourful parts of the planet, and then finish off the rest of the detail with an ordinary pencil, HB pencil, and then finally paint it in black with ordinary processed black. That has to be as close to the original black and white drawing as possible, except that it's in colour. Right. And if it's possible to do it quick enough, you can even go back out to the telescope and check it out and have a look at the planet again and compare it to the drawing to see how close you are.
Because the point about all these is they are absolutely meticulously observed.
Yes, these are actual observations. They have to be accurate, otherwise anyone who wants to use the information on these drawings would find them totally useless. Right. This is Mars. This was done a few years ago. Mars is a very colourful planet, and the black and white drawings don't do it justice, so I think it's even more important than with Saturn to do a colour rendition of Mars. It really looks very colourful. So again, use a colour wash to show the red deserts and the yellow clouds, the white polar caps. And then again, the detail of Mars itself is put in detail with pencil, as accurately as possible. Again, though, that's based on a black and white drawing done at the telescope.
Now, why drawings? Just tell me this. Why drawings as opposed to, being an astrophotographer?
Right. In these days, it's possible to get some very accurate photographs and very good photographs, but the equipment is very, very expensive. In the past, over the last 25 years that I've been making these drawings, it hasn't been possible to get really good photographs. In fact, with the telescope down in the garden there, I can see the planets better than you can photograph them with even the largest telescopes in the world. And I can also spend maybe an hour looking through the telescope, waiting for the best seeing conditions until I see all the detail that's there. Whereas with a camera, it's difficult to do that. To keep taking photographs and hoping you're going to get a good image is going to cost a lot of money. All it costs me is the price of a pencil and a bit of paint and board.
I suppose apart from that, it really is a record of your observations.
Yes. This is a drawing of Jupiter. Jupiter's a very detailed planet. You can see quite a lot of detail even with a small telescope. With a telescope like that down in the garden, you can see a tremendous amount of detail. Cloud details very clearly.
Nice.
Mercury, very difficult to see. In fact, I've only seen it probably about 50 or 60 times in my life. It's always too close to the sun to see clearly. So you have to observe it during the daytime, even though it looks as though there's a black sky there. You don't see a great deal of detail. In fact, now we've got the spacecraft pictures back, we can see craters, and you could never hope to see that sort of detail with a telescope.
Sure.
And Venus, we again observe during the day. This planet's so brilliant. The cloud cover on Venus is incredible. Highly reflective. It reflects about 75% of the light it receives from the sun. And the best time to look is during the day. If you look at it at night, it's so brilliant you don't see the detail. Whereas if you pick it up in the daytime, you can see the faint cloud patterns, and that's why I've painted this in a blue to show that the observation has been made during the daytime.
Sure, sure.
But I also would like to imagine what it would be like to stand on the surface of these places that I'm looking at through the telescope. I'll never be able to go there, but to actually imagine the scene from those planets, it's mind-blowing. But the thing is, I don't want them to be pure fantasy. I want them to be as accurate as possible based on the knowledge that we've got. If I was standing on Pluto, for instance, I would like to think that I would see that scene. It would be impossible for any spacecraft to enter into the rings of Saturn. It would be destroyed. But if we could go into the rings of Saturn, I'm sure that's how it would look.
These remind me so much of those marvellous books I used to have when I was a boy, you know, that would be, you know, an artist's impression of life on Mars or life on Venus, etc.
It's almost science fiction, but in my case, it's based on observational work, and I'd like to think that they're as accurate as it's possible to be. I don't want them to be fantasy pictures. I'd like to think that if we went there, you'd be seeing that scene.
Quite a clear picture though, isn't it?
People often think that buying a telescope is the only way to get started in astronomy, but this may not be such a good idea. If you're a beginner, telescopes are not all that easy to use, especially if you rush out and buy a cheap one.
The problem with any telescope is that it's only looking at a small area of sky and magnifying it, especially the ones that are sold on the strength of their enormous magnifications. Well, if you just point that telescope at random in the sky and expect to see something, you've got something like a 1 in 5,000 chance of hitting anything interesting. The rest of the time, you're just going to hit empty sky. If you are off from where you thought you were, you can't even tell which way to move. Once you find the object, you'll find it wobbles all over the place because usually the tripods are very insecure. And then even supposing you find an object, you get it to stop wobbling, the Earth is turning, the thing's going to drift out of the picture in a matter of moments and you're going to have to start all over again.
Yeah, got it. Very good.
We have a little campaign before Christmas every year, certainly those who are keen to buy Wee Johnny a telescope for Christmas. We assure them that Wee Johnny may be able to boast about it at school and say, I've got a telescope, but he won't actually see anything through it.
If you're going to start finding your way around the night sky, the best equipment for that is your own eyes. And if you want to see more, what you need is probably not a telescope, but a pair of binoculars. The thing to remember, however, is that magnification is not the be-all and end-all. What you want is a bright image. These binoculars are 8 by 42. 8 is the magnification, 42 is the diameter of the lens at the front in millimeters. The bigger this is, the more light and the brighter the picture. So avoid those compact binoculars, which are, say, 8 by 24. They'll only give you a very dim image when you look in the sky. And many small telescopes, similarly, have a tiny lens at the front and promise enormous magnification. But the image is so dim, you can't really see anything.
Then in the mid-1860s, there was a big expansion in the observatory. They acquired...
Fintan O'Reilly runs the Astronomy Society at his school, though his real job is teaching Latin. He remembers clearly the moment when a pair of binoculars sparked his interest in astronomy.
When I was about 15, I was coming home one night in a city I made in Glasgow, bright streetlights, and I happened to notice in the sky a bright, what looked an exceptionally bright star. And I was somewhat intrigued and puzzled. I borrowed my father's binoculars, and then when I had a look at that, I noticed there were 4 little stars beside it. I was even more intrigued, And it took a visit to the local library, to the astronomy section, to get a book out and then comb through that, and then discovering that, in fact, I was actually looking at the planet Jupiter with its 4 Galilean moons. And that's the first time the space age had begun, and I was kind of under the impression you really needed a spaceship or a huge telescope like this to see a planet. It's the first time I realized you could actually see planets with the naked eye, and you could see a lot of quite interesting things with ordinary small pair of binoculars.
Joseph Wright's painting of 1766 wasn't just a work of art. It was accurate in scientific terms. 5 planets plus the Earth making 6 in all. But the paint wasn't long dry when this view of the solar system suddenly was out of date. Battle of Hastenbeck in 1756. And a young musician in the German army band, William Herschel, found himself spending the night in a ditch hiding from the French. He decided then and there to leave the army and come to Britain. William Herschel loved to do things properly, and he worked at his English until it was perfect. He taught music, played the oboe, the violin, and the organ, and in 1766 he moved to Bath. This house in New King Street was where the great event of his life occurred, but it had nothing to do with music.
Bath was a city of manners, sophistication, and polite society. And William Herschel, with his now flawless English, his musical ability, and his good looks, must have found it all very agreeable. He composed music, he organized concerts, he gave private music lessons, and he could have lived out his life very comfortably here in Bath. But his interest in discovering new things was unstoppable.
When I read of the many charming discoveries that have been made by means of the telescope, I wished to see the heavens and planets with my own eyes through one of these instruments.
Herschel didn't have the money to buy a really good telescope, so he decided to build his own. His sister Caroline, who lived with him, wasn't impressed when virtually every room in the house, including the kitchen, was turned into a workshop.
His first task involved heating up mixtures of copper and tin to make the metal discs that he would then grind and polish to make mirrors.
It wasn't always successful. His diary records the occasion when the molten metal escaped onto the floor and the flagstones exploded. Here's a bit of failed mirror, which Herschel chucked out into the garden. But once he got the casting right, then there was the difficult job of grinding a curved surface to make a good telescope mirror. He made over 200 mirrors, and on one occasion ground a mirror for 16 hours without stopping. His sister had to spoon feed him to keep him going. He tested his mirrors with a candle flame by looking to see if the image was distorted or not. Eventually, he made a mirror he was really pleased with. Herschel was a real back garden astronomer. Once he had his mirror, he could build the rest of the telescope himself. The light travels down the wooden tube here to the mirror, which is down here. The mirror reflects the light back up to a small mirror, which turns the beam sideways into the eyepiece. Herschel also built his own eyepieces. Although it was homemade, this was really a pretty good telescope. And in his methodical way, Herschel decided to make a complete study of the sky. He called it his Review of the Heavens.
After about 8 years of observations, when he knew the night sky really well, his diary records an unexpected event.
Between 10 and 11 in the evening, while I was observing the small stars in the neighborhood of H. Geminorum, I perceived one that appeared visibly larger than the rest. Being struck with its uncommon magnitude, I suspected it to be a comet.
Other astronomers turned their telescopes on this new object in the sky, and gradually people realized that what Herschel had discovered was not a comet, but a brand new planet.
The planet Saturn, 900 million miles away, had been the most distant object in the solar system. But this new planet was twice as far away. And so overnight, with his homemade telescope, Herschel had doubled the size of the known solar system.
Herschel became famous and the king granted him a royal pension, so he initially named the planet the Star of George. On the continent, where they didn't like the idea of naming anything after an English king, they called it Herschel. But after a while, everyone settled for a non-controversial Greek god, Uranus. Even in a big telescope, it is just a tiny aquamarine disk, and the only way to see much more of it is to go there.
Lift off. Lift off.
What would Herschel have thought of Voyager 2, the unmanned spacecraft sent out to take a closer look at the planets? Launched in 1977, it took 7 years for Voyager to reach Uranus, and it sent back some of the most beautiful pictures of Herschel's planet, 1,800 million miles away. 4 times the size of Earth, Uranus is a frozen planet with an average temperature of minus 220. Like Saturn, the planet has a ring around it. It's covered in clouds of frozen methane. The faint light of our sun is reflected from the surface of the planet, and the methane clouds absorb the red light, so we just see blue. Since then, 2 more planets, Neptune and Pluto, have been discovered, even further from the Sun than Uranus, making a total of 9 planets orbiting our Sun. There may be more, even further away, or we may have found them all. There may be planets going around other stars, but nobody's seen them yet. We put together an astronomy project pack which will help to get you started if you'd like to find out more about the night sky. If you'd like a pack, please send a cheque or postal order for £9.99 made out to BBC Education to this address. Astronomy Pack, P.O. Box 7, London W3 6XJ.